So the topic for today is pretty common issue which all of us face, and including the family physicians. Diabetic nephropathy treatment and challenges. So we'll try and cover up in the next 40 minutes as to what, so why are we talking of this issue? Because globally around 85 crore people suffer from CKD, 15 crore in India. 10 to 15 lakh people die from CKD annually, and CKD is the 12th commonest cause of death and the 6th fastest growing cause of death. Around 2 lakh people are on dialysis in India, and the Indians unfortunately suffer from CKD at a much earlier age, the age at which they are the main breadwinners of the family. And the same way we undergo angioplasties and we suffer from CVD much earlier. And I always say that being Indian itself is a risk factor for both CKD and CVD. And also, again, unfortunately, the only affordable treatment for CKD is prevention. And this topic is meant for that. So let's take the case and move around this case to try and solve a few problems. So Munna Bhai went for a routine health checkup because of a little increase in urination. His investigations came, he had a HbA1c of 8.5 with no end organ changes. Urine normal, ECG no 2D echo showing nothing, retina normal. So everything else normal except HbA1c. His father had diabetic kidney disease, ischemic heart disease, and he had died on dialysis. So he consulted Dr. Manoj Chawla and he's asking him, look, Manoj, I don't want to develop CKD. So Manoj, can we, and if yes, how can we prevent him from developing CKD? Is it possible? And how?
Right. So afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Dr. Umesh Khanna, for this moderation of the panel discussion and the question on Munna Bhai. So Munna Bhai is our, so can we have that slide with the, yeah, okay. So Munna Bhai is a typical individual who's been detected recently, newly, with an A1C of 8.5. As of now, no organ damage, and he's come to see one of us for improving his metabolic control. And his main concern is that how I don't develop CKD in future. Now, if you have somebody like Munna Bhai who's already aware or kind of worried or petrified about not getting a complication, I think it's amongst the better patients to begin with who really has a concern. However, what may happen to Munna Bhai's story is for us to wait and see. So such an individual, right from the beginning, the idea is to maintain good aggressive control of this individual's glycemia. Of course, time to time screen for the presence of any comorbidities or complications. As of now, we can see that he does not have any end organ damage. So the mandatory being a type 2 screening for any presence of retinal affection, looking at the lipids, looking at the blood pressure, and other basic routine investigations. The point here to be made to Munna Bhai is the need for us to maintain good aggressive control from day one. Today, with all the evidence that we have over the years with multiple studies and data, the aspect of need for early aggressive control, the impact of good metabolic memory, especially in the first 2 years of being diagnosed with diabetes, the avoidance of a bad glycemic legacy. Enough evidence today has linked the fact that if your sugars are going to be kept under good control, and I would say for somebody like Munna Bhai, the target would probably be closer to 6.5 NHbA1c. If you're able to maintain something like that for him and give him protection right from beginning, he is somebody that we are trying to prevent complications from setting in from the years to come. So the important point here today is with the kind of drugs that we have, you are able to today maintain individuals in good glycemic control without increasing their chance of either hypoglycemia or weight gain, which were the major worries in the past when we didn't have the drugs which were as helpful and safer. So with these drugs and the data that we have seen, whether it is from the Verify study, which talks about early aggressive control and which avoids moving on to more medications and insulin, or right from UKPDS, the impact of early control, I think it's about counseling Munna Bhai about his diet, lifestyle, and the need to start medications and continue maintain a good follow-up. That's one thing that we can do at this stage to ensure that he doesn't land up with complications like his father did and allay some of his fears?
So I think the answer to that question, can we, you said, yes, we can. And the answer of how you said is to make him realize the importance of tight sugar control. What about the role of SGLT2 today in trying to prevent complications, including CVD and CKD? He's around 40, 42 years of age. In your prescription, what would you start off? Of course, we know, but what would be the medications you would give him?
For Munna Bhai with an HbA1c of 8.5 today, what we need to again remember is the current recommendation says if somebody has an HbA1c 1.5% above their target, it's always better today to start with dual therapy rather than doing the earlier stepwise aspect of single individual therapy. Now, as I said, the target for Munna Bhai would be somewhere around 6.5. He's still young, doesn't have any complications. So from 8.5 for me to get him to closer to 6.5, I need to use 2 drug therapies.
Right.
The choice and options that we really have, which are, as I said, safer, is to consider between a DPP4 and metformin and an SGLT2 and metformin. Now, we do have good evidence for the DPP4 metformin segment in terms of good glycemic control, durability, avoiding hypoglycemia and weight gain. SGLT2 inhibitors, on the other hand, have shown evidence in terms of prevention of complications in the long run. Of course, the aspect of cardiovascular protection, especially when it comes to reducing hospitalization for heart failure, impact on the renal endpoints, which I'm sure we'll discuss ahead.
Yes, correct. So right now it is whether it would help in preventing any of this.
Right. So at this stage, I don't think in terms of whatever data we have, it's very strong from the primary prevention point of view. We do have a lot of data from the secondary prevention. Unless this patient has a very, very strong history, has a higher BMI, I may at this stage still prefer to choose for this individual a DPP4 metformin over an SGLT2 metformin.
Excellent. Any of the other speakers, Ami or Purvi, want to give your comment on whether you will use metformin with DPP4 or any other choice of drugs at this stage for Munna Bhai? Or is it open? You can use any of them.
So can I answer?
Yes.
I can also add, yeah. Sir, first of all, good afternoon and thank you for making me a part of this panel. I said, as Dr. Manoj rightly pointed out, that we need to, get his A1C down to 6.5. And yes, DPP4 inhibitors and metformin would be a good choice, but even with SGLT2 inhibitors, with the guidelines, what the ADA, ESD has said, sir, even an SGLT2 inhibitor with the metformin would help us, in getting down the A1C 1, bringing down this weight 2, and bring in terms of as Dr. Manoj has already mentioned about primary prevention with the data available with SGLT2 inhibitors and metformin. I think we can even think about starting an SGLT2 inhibitor with metformin in terms of bringing down the cardiovascular risk, the renal risk, long-term effect, because he has a family history, and that would really help us to bring down the risk in terms of complications.
So anybody would want to stop his sulfonylureas if somebody else had started?
Maybe reduce the dose, sir.
Along with metformin.
Maybe reduce the dose, sir.
Oh, okay. So I thought at the end of the discussion, this guy's HbA1c should be brought down. Metformin is definitely on board. DPP4 versus SGLT2, but there's no mention of sulfonylureas. Would that be also one of the choices? Because at this stage, does it matter? CVD protection would be as important, or we can talk only of blood sugar management? Anybody can take. Yeah.
Sir, actually, good afternoon, everyone. This is Dr. Purvi Chawla here.
Yes,
and thank you very much for this very
I must tell you that here, this is an open forum. You may or may not agree with Manoj Chawla. It doesn't matter. Irrespective. Ghar ka baad mein dekh lenge. Yeah.
Consequences have to be thought about.
Yes. Okay. Please carry on.
I'm right now we are in two different cities, so definitely does not matter.
Okay, fine. Yeah.
Okay, sir. So for me, one of the primary considerations would be the BMI or weight of the patient.
Okay, 30.
Okay, so definitely, I think for me, the choice of an SGLT2 inhibitor would come slightly higher than DPP4. I would not want to select a sulfonylurea simply because of the risk of hypoglycemia. This individual is young and working and with the lifestyle of a younger individual. I think although they can be counseled really well for sulfonylurea, I would probably reserve the use until a little later. I think our entire thought process for managing diabetes has undergone a sea change. It's no longer only about the glucose, it's definitely preventing complications, but it's also looking at the comorbidities and the risk and then choosing the different agents that we have today on board. So for me, I think with a 30 BMI, probably an early start of DPP4 and metformin, but I would not shy away from using an SGLT2 inhibitor as well.
Excellent. So we spent 10 minutes in discussing how to prevent this person from going into end organ changes. And I thought it was worth it because in a survey, if you do, less than 7-8% of the people would be on SGLT2 inhibitors, and maybe even lesser for such a kind of patient who needs to be actually thought of whether SGLT2 should be given or not. Anyway, Munna Bhai.
So just a very minor point. Sir, on the first slide, I think the statistics are very clear. I just want to add that I think the quality of life of the patient with CKD is also so poor that we definitely, it further emphasizes the point that we need to prevent it rather than let the patient progress towards it.
I think we've lost Dr. Khanna's connection.
Yeah, I think.
So either you or any of the chairpersons can take the story ahead till Dr. Khanna joins in interest of time.
Yes.
Dr. Khanna, I can see.
So if I have to take it to the nephrologists, now if we happen to diagnose diabetic nephropathy, how do we go about now? Is it like every rising creatinine in a diabetic nephropathy?
Sorry, apologize for stopping you. I'm aware of Munna Bhai's story as Dr. Khanna is here. Before we get into the rising creatinine, I think we'll have a stage of microalbuminuria. So Dr. Khanna is here, he can take it.
So we lost you for some time.
You're mute, Dr. Khanna. You want to start sharing again, sir?
Can we have the technical team to unmute everyone? Sir, you are there. We can see you, Dr. Khanna.
Yes, but let me share my screen again then. What happened? Let me go back and come. Meanwhile, I think the panelists can take the discussion further.
You're already there.
Yeah, I'm there, but my sharing of the screen is giving me trouble. Is the
Maybe
screen
you could put in the next question to the nephrologist and we
Screen is visible. Your screen is visible now.
Why is it not visible to me? I don't know what's happening.
Just click on the DKD panel, the arrow. We can see your whole desktop screen. So the DKD panel is right there, the last one. You want to click on it? Yes.
Now is it visible?
Yeah.
Yes, visible.
Yeah.
Yes. So I don't know what went wrong. Maybe I'm a very poor technical guy. Right. So we move ahead. That extra time jo tha, wo sab nikal gaya in this. Anyway, Munna Bhai developed trace of albumin in one of his routine health checkups. He had put on weight further. HbA1c 9.5. Manoj Chawla had great faith in Munna Bhai, but he possibly did not listen to Manoj. Blood pressure 150/90. Spot urine albumin creatinine ratio is 300. GFR 90 still. Creatinine bang normal. Has he missed the bus? Manoj, he's back to you.
Well, he probably has missed the bus, but he may still have a chance to get a rickshaw or Ola or Uber if he's smart enough at this stage.
Right.
And that's what we need to help him with. Urine albumin creatinine 300 milligram, GFR 90, already stage 1 CKD, poor metabolic control at 9.5. He's somebody who probably had responded earlier to DPP metformin, but doesn't continue to do so, doesn't have durability. At this stage, we need to be now extremely concerned about where he's headed, get far more aggressive on his glycemic control, talk to him about, counsel him again, and also now start screening him for the rest of complications and keeping his albuminuria in mind. Use everything to try and protect that. So whether we're talking about an ACE ARB from that aspect, and of course, this is the stage that if one had done what I did earlier in terms of DPP-4 metformin and did not use SGLT2 earlier, this is that stage that we need to now start using SGLT2. He's at 9.5. So if he's already at DPP-4 on metformin and 9.5, we have to use an SGLT2. Hopefully he tolerates it, but we may have to get even more aggressive, keeping in mind that we need to get his A1C down by 2.5 to 3%. We may have to even consider early insulin therapy for such an individual who's been losing control and already getting albuminuria.
I think we discussed quite a few points and we'll try and dissect one by one. Rushi, Manoj has been gracious enough to refer to a nephrologist. So what would be, according to you, the targets which you want to keep for this individual? Blood pressure? What about lipids, RAS? How would you manage? He has come to you now.
Yeah. First, thank you, Dr. Umesh Khanna and the team for inviting me to be a part of this session. See, this is one of the dilemma we faced in the clinic almost on a daily basis, right? So, I mean, 2 out of 3 patients on dialysis are there because of diabetic nephropathy, and that just brings home how the severity of the problem. So, about controlling the
so blood pressure target. Let's HbA1c. I think Manoj, you said 6.5 at that stage.
Yeah.
Would you now elevate it to 7 before I go to Rushi again?
Yes, 7 and less than 7, not necessarily 6.5.
Okay, fine. Rushi. So Rushi, the blood pressure target. Would you be happy with 140/90, 130/80, or how do you bet?
So he's a young guy. He is not having any autonomic neuropathy at the moment. So anything less than 130/80 is good. His proteinuria is less than a gram at the moment.
Right.
But still, I mean, you would want to target 130/80. And even if he's tolerating, I would not mind going down to 125/75 session.
Right. So for all those who missed the word which he said, he does not have autonomic neuropathy. What Dr. Rushi meant was every patient you will check his standing blood pressure so that when he tries to bring it down to 130/80, he doesn't become very symptomatic and stops the BP medicine. That's the point which Dr. Rushi actually made while he talked about autonomic neuropathy. Yes. So which antihypertensive drugs, Rushi, you will use?
The drug of choice here is definitely a RAS inhibition, and you would go with an ARB for now. Once a day or twice a day really doesn't make a big difference, whichever your choice of ARB you want to go with. But I think the key here is to start the dose and build it up to the maximum tolerated dose.
Right.
So when I say build it up to the maximum tolerated dose, it's basically 2 things. One is hyperkalemia, which we have to be cognizant and watching for. Some rise in creatinine is expected from baseline, but it should not be about 30% from baseline maximally. In this gentleman, because the creatinine is still normal, he's not even going to perceive the change in creatinine. So here is a very good time to start the ARB. And if he sticks onto the medicines properly, he can have a really long kidney survival. And, as we know, the mechanism of action of ACE or ARB goes far beyond BP control when it comes to reducing the albuminuria. So it is not, so that's why the emphasis on maximum tolerated dose.
So Rushi, ARBs you used, BP still remaining more than 140/90. What would you like to add, or what the family physician should do if the BP is not coming under control? Up to how much of ARB you would probably go up
Here,
to,
Dr. Khanna, here I think we have already seen the patient and kind of done our homework, made sure
Yeah.
that there is no possibility of this being a non-diabetic kidney disease. So that is kind of taken for granted, right?
yes, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So because it is very imperative for
Yes,
all of
very
us in the here to understand and remember that not all diabetics get a diabetic kidney disease.
Correct.
Similarly, not every kidney disease in a diabetic patient is because of diabetes. In out of 5 or 7, 6 patients of diabetes who come to you with a kidney problem, one might not have a kidney problem linked to diabetes. And if you
Yeah.
can pick that one, the prognosis will be very different for that person. So it's
Absolutely.
important to remember that.
Yeah.
Now,
I
if
think,
you are a diabetic nephropathy, you are proteinuric and you are hypertensive, the hypertension is not going to respond to monotherapy. Most of these patients will be on 3 or 4 classes of antihypertensives by the time their GFR goes to 60. So Dr. Khanna has asked a very relevant and important question about what are the next things that you have to add. Because just monotherapy with ARBs may not be sufficient. The drugs which are really, good, by good I mean a significant improvement in the hypertension is a calcium channel blocker. And here we prefer the non-dihydrocolloid calcium channel blockers or the newer generation agents, which are the LNL, so cilnidipine and penidipine and that class of drugs, which have antiproteinuric effect in addition to BP control. So that would be the second drug that I usually go to.
yeah. So Bhavesh, this patient did not have proteinuria, has only, his urine routine and spot urine is negative. Would your antihypertensive be still necessarily be ACE-ARB, or now you will allow any antihypertensive to be used? And if you're using ARB, how do you manage his diet and hyperkalemia prevention? If do you see that more often? We are still on ACE-ARB because that's a primary care which is important from the family physician point of view. And how do you start it? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Khanna, for the invite. I would say that if the patient is non-proteinuric and diabetic and having hypertension, and if there is an evidence of end organ damage elsewhere, still the drug of choice would be ARB.
Okay.
Even if there is no end organ damage and he is a diabetic and hypertensive, still the drug of choice would be ARB.
Okay.
This is to keep in mind few things. That one is that the intraglomerular pressure will reduce in patients where we are using the ARB. So even if he is at a stage where he is not, there is not significant nephropathy as yet to allow a certain amount of proteinuria to occur, he is likely a future candidate to develop proteinuric nephropathy. So the drug of choice I would still keep as ARB, and I would prefer ARB over ACE inhibitors for the reasons of side effects and patients coming back. And there is enough data to say that ACE inhibitors and ARBs have a equally good outcome in terms of long-term effects. So I would still continue to use ARB.
Right. Ami or Purvi, what about lipids? Do you put every patient on statins and ecosprin? What is the role of these two in patients who have no coronary artery disease?
So I think at this point, we should just aggressively screen a few points, I think, which require further emphasis are that the patient needs to be counseled further. He seemed like a motivated patient in the first place. We need to emphasize further on lifestyle changes also, because at every point they are important. As far as statins are concerned, I think with this lipidemia, we would definitely consider them. But as far as ecosprin is considered, I think would look for secondary prevention and not, otherwise. So that's.
So no ecosprin if he has no coronary artery disease, but statins, yes, for every patient. That's what I heard it correctly.
Can I add a point here?
Yeah.
Umesh bhai, can I add a point here?
Please. It's free for all.
So here I would say that if there is a, taking the question further, that if ACE-ARB is not controlling the BP enough, I would first of all emphasize with the patient about the ek chamach kam concept that we are, roping in and educating our patients. That ek chamach kam is the, our logo, our tag line for controlling. It's the full thing is ek chamach kam SOS. It is salt, oil, and sugar. So if the patient is emphasizing on his salt, oil, and sugar control, automatically the blood pressure will become much easier to control. So in somebody who is difficult to control hypertension, rather than thinking about which next drug to use, I would go back to basics and ask the questions pertaining to the diet, and probably ask the patient to consult a dietitian and make sure that all the the basics of diet are followed and implemented in order to have a better outcome, and probably reduce the number of drugs that are required.
Right. So before closing the chapter on ASARBs, couple of points. Some of them who have type 4 RTA have a tendency towards hyperkalemia. Just get a dietitian on board to explain to them which are the lower potassium items and which you must concentrate on. See to it that he's not taking low salt or potassium salt. And in addition, if a small dose of diuretic may be required, then that could be added to reduce the chances of hyperkalemia. If the patient is already volume depleted, then don't start ACRB to begin with, but you can add once the euvolemia is achieved. Fine. Munna Bhai story continues. 10 years later, Munna Bhai develops edema feet, frothy urine, proteinuria 2.8 grams per day, creatinine of 1.7, blood pressure 170 by 100. And what is your approach now? Before that, I think amongst the three diabetologists, one question remained. At that stage, 5 years down the line, the previous here, those who had not yet put him on SGLT2, would all of you all put him on SGLT2 along with metformin? Would you continue metformin? What is happening? His HbA1c. We wanted it to be 7, but it was 8.5. Abhi kya karenge? Anti-hyperglycemic therapy.
The ladies have just done a session about why should men have all the fun. So if they want to speak first.
Yeah, any of them. And I find it difficult to make out whether Purvi is speaking or Ami is speaking. So if you can. Photo
Sure, sir.
Yeah, okay, fine.
Okay, this be here, sir. So definitely SGLT2 inhibitor would be used, but since the the GFR is okay, we would probably continue metformin. And one thing that I want to highlight, which I think we haven't highlighted, is the fact that this patient is obese now. Yeah. So that's definitely at least amongst us physicians, we should have it as a recognized disease rather than just letting it be
so one liner, all the panelists, one liner. All the panelists are okay with SGLT2 or anybody has a problem?
No, sir. I think SGLT2
everybody
from here. Yeah.
Fine. So,
the only point quickly, Dr. Khanna, I'll make is, as I said, this guy was on DPP for metformin, should be on an SGLT, but that will not suffice. He was at 9.5. Right. Ideally, an addition of a GLP, if he can afford or tolerate it, or insulin at that stage was needed.
Fine. So I think a good point made. And we go back to now here, I think the nephrologist should be on board. One of you all can take up this case as to how will you manage his whatever was abnormal. Creatinine 1. So first question, metformin, will you stop or continue? Bhavesh or Ruchi, anybody?
For the metformin part,
this patient here.
Yeah. So if presuming he's 40, 45 years, 50 years old now he's 55 years old or so.
Yeah.
And if he's weighing around 80 kg or so, if we try and calculate the GFR, if the GFR falls to less than 30, then continuing with metformin will be difficult. The risk-benefit ratio would favor removal of metformin. If the GFR is falling in the range of 30 to 45, then reduction of the dose of metformin would be the recommendations from all the standard societies. Okay. And if it is more than 45, then you can continue to use it in the usual dose that he has been going on.
Right. So we take it as 30 to 45.
Correct.
So metformin small dose. How much would you like to continue?
I mean, about a gram or so per day.
Okay. 10,000, yes.
Yeah. Less than
1,000 milligrams.
He was on pioglitazone. You want to continue or stop?
I would favor removal of pioglitazone simply because it has significant amount of water, salt and water retention tendency. And this patient has now got a compromised GFR and he's already retaining salt and water. That's how he has become edematous and he has gained weight.
In spite of the advice from panelists, he continued Glimepiride. You want to stop or reduce the dose, or he doesn't want insulin. Injection से डर लगता है.
ये nephrologist को पूछ रहे हो या diabetologist को पूछ रहे हो?
Anybody can answer.
I think diabetes people should answer.
So,
Injection से डर लगता है.
hmm.
And he was on sorry, no, I shouldn't take the name. Glimepiride.
Well, so needs of course counseling. अगर insulin से डर लगता है तो that he's gonna need it. Well, let's assume कि नहीं लेता है बिल्कुल. You're reducing his metformin. You're gonna need some drugs to manage his glycemia. So you will have to continue SUs. You will have to look at AGIs, the whole stuff from the armamentarium that he can, and keep counseling. Ki insulin probably is the way ahead.
Fine. I don't see Rushi Deshpande, but Rushi, he was given diuretics, good dose. His edema continued, seems to be not responding to furosemide. You shifted to torsemide. Now what? Is Rushi around?
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, basically, the question is, what are we doing wrong? Is it that he's not controlling his salt and water intake? Or this person, even though all he said about the fear that he had of not getting CKD 10 years back, he has not behaved the way he should have.
Okay.
He has not been consistent. This was one person who, with good treatment, this should have happened maybe 20 years later and not 10 years later.
Right.
So,
you want him to behave well. Yeah.
So that's very important, because particularly now that he is developing a stage 4 CKD and he's having, excessive salt and water retention. Now he doesn't, with this kind of hypertension, he's going to now progress on to dialysis pretty rapidly in the next 3-4 years.
Right.
So it is very important for him to really behave well, control his salt, water intake, control his pressure.
So वो सब किया, torsemide, furosemide not working. Is there a role for metalazone or mineralocorticoid? Potassium is 4.5. Blood pressure is 170/100. Is there any role for any of these drugs, or you will be?
So we are right now on what? ARB.
He's on furosemide. Yeah,
So
yeah.
we are on ARB.
He's on ARB. Yeah. He's on
Calcium channel
ARB.
blocker.
Yes.
Alpha
ARB
blocker,
calcium blocker.
and diuretic.
Yes. So resistant hypertension.
So we are already in that phase.
Right.
So here, I think the key is again salt. Basically, the consumption of salt has to be strictly reduced. This is one instance where
Correct.
I'm very strict about it.
Right.
And then how we achieve if a significant dose of a potent loop diuretic like torsemide is not doing the job, then we'll have to use combination, because that is where we talk about synergy of diuretics. So you use diuretics working at different parts of the nephron to get synergistic effect. So if you add a metalazone which works on the distal part of the nephron compared to the loop diuretics which are working obviously on the loop of Henle, then you provide sequential blockade, and thereby the natriuresis that we all desire for is achieved much better. But again, this comes at a price, because this will lead to volume contraction and a rise in creatinine, particularly if you are on a good dose of ARB. That is bound to happen when we do this treatment.
So this is a take-home message for the primary care physician, that when you try to volume contract it, the patient becomes much better, symptomatically is very happy, but he's surprised to see that his reports are not too good. But this has to be informed to them much in advance. This is what our problem now is. Because of lack of time, we do not inform them about the issues of ACRBs, SGLT2, diuretics, etc. All good drugs. The drugs earn a bad name, and the patient comes back with a higher creatinine, changes the nephrologist or a diabetologist, because he has not been informed about the issues which will come up with a proper treatment. So I think that's a point well made by Dr. Rushi Deshpande about volume contraction and rise in creatinine, not the true worsening of the disease. Okay. Right. So till now, and of course, it's about 3-4 years old, diabetic kidney disease was a kind of orphan disease. There was hardly any treatment. We were actually searching for a disease treatment. And I think all the panelists have enumerated what should be done. We don't have a diabetologist. We don't have a dietitian on board today, but I think her role or his role would be extremely important to bring in lifestyle changes, weight loss, smoking, etc. Because there has been a sea change in the guidelines everywhere. Medical nutrition therapy comes right on top, and that's a paradigm shift now in terms of treatment. As Rushi made a point again and again, Bhavesh made a point about ek chammach kam. So the first 2 lines are based on that, and of course We had a couple of sessions on why plant-based diet is important. So we're not going to spend more time on diet. We've covered up almost all these points, and we have this Sasta drug called soda bicarb. So when will you use and not use soda bicarb, Rushi or Bhavesh, anybody on this patient of 2.8 creatinine?
Rushi, want to take it?
Okay. So basically, so like the name goes, sodium bicarbonate. On one hand, we wanted to restrict the sodium intake, and now we are giving. But again, correcting the acidosis has benefits in regards to bone health as well as cardiac benefits. So if the patient is having metabolic acidosis, we will have to give a correction of the metabolic acidosis. But along with that, we will have to further emphasize on more salt restriction.
Right. So fine. I think, so what he's trying to say is that this is our important drug in terms of acidosis correction. If the patient has acidosis, one must correct it, keeping in mind that it will add on to the volume overload. And now we move on to the newer drugs, which are game changers. Yes.
Sorry, so sodamine tablets can be crushed and used as salt rather than adding salt to the food.
Excellent.
So that will
but does it
dual
taste
purpose.
As salty or more or less?
I mean, not as salty, little less salty, but tangy.
Less salty.
Right.
But tangy, so the taste is good.
Tangy. Oh, okay. So that's a good thing. I did not know about it. So Bhavesh, thanks for informing, including the family physician. So we know about, there have been umpteen number of lectures on the importance of SGLT2 inhibitors, and we're not going to waste much time about its use. But I want to bring out a few points as to when, how should we best use SGLT2 inhibitors so that the percentage of usage in the world, even in the most advanced countries, it's 14 to 15% usage of SGLT2 inhibitors. We are not using a drug which is supposedly a game changer. So I think there should be, would Manoj want to use tell us as to how best to use SGLT2 inhibitors so that the good points come out, the bad points are explained, and the drug does not earn a bad name.
Right. So, well, in terms of the numbers, absolutely right. The percentage number still all over the world is less. However, we'll see that change, especially in countries like India, because of the drug going generic. So if we do an analysis a year later, the scenario would have changed. Having said that, every good drug has its own strengths and some limitations, and it becomes our job as a physician to be aware and selective of the same. So how best to use? Well, we of course know its benefits now, whether it's in terms of heart failure and CVD benefits, and also on the renoprotective benefits. Side effects extremely important. In fact, this is one drug when we were listening about the drug even 2 years before it was launched in the market. This was one drug that we realized that we are talking more about its side effect rather than its effect. So I'm talking about several years back. So that has always been a concern. There are the list of side effects, but what are of course more bothersome is the recurrent genitourinary infection, some possibility of UTIs, usually lower track UTIs, and volume depletion. I don't think in terms of amputations, fractures, that's been a great concern. There were some concerns earlier, but many studies after that haven't substantiated, and most of us using this in clinical practice wouldn't have seen that to be a problem. But the other side effects are a limitation. Patients who respond to this and who take that would love this drug. A lot would have extreme discomfort with the recurrent GU or giddiness or volume issues, and they will just refuse to take it. Fortunately, the numbers not responding to this in terms of not tolerating are about 15 to 20% and may vary from physicians to physicians observation. Use it and of course there are don'ts where you don't use this drug. There are this thing in which I will let my other co-panelists speak about in situations where you don't want to use this drug.
So the best part about today's symposium or panel discussion is that it is not sponsored by any company. You have to have your lunch on your own. And so we can be very, very scientific about the need for when to use, when not to use. So I think whoever wants to take it up, I have listed the contraindications, or it should not be used in type 1 diabetes, in lupus because of immunosuppression, polycystic kidney, the trials were not conducted, they were excluded, ANCA vasculitis, and those receiving or recently received immunosuppressants. The drug does not work on dialysis patients because the primary method of its usage or its work is through the tubules, distal tubules. hypersensitive to the drug, obviously you will not use. So there are a few more areas. If somebody wants to highlight, please do so. But for lack of time, I have also listed. We have about, I think, 7-8 minutes to go, 9 minutes to go. Anybody wants to, which patients you need to be careful while using SGLT2 inhibitors? It's not a no, but I think these areas which people can be a little more careful, because I feel eventually it's the family primary care physicians who should eventually use SGLT2 inhibitors, and should not be only a cardiologist drug, a nephrologist drug, or a diabetologist drug. It should eventually percolate down to the primary care physician. So they should know when to use and when not to use. So these are the areas where one needs to be careful about. And why I'm bringing it out, because I've seen an 80-year-old person staying alone, who's hardly, mobile, being put on a SGLT2 inhibitor. So if we are careful about it, we may not bring a bad name to it. So these are the situations where you should not. And the elderly, I want this slide to be brought out. Now, the elderly is a special population with special problems. One must be careful about using it in them, because volume depletion is common in them. They have the irritating issues of polyuria, and since we know that SGLT2 inhibitors will increase the urine output, that's a problem. Volume depletion will make them fall, staying alone without any help. They have the problems of prostate and nocturia, and they have recurrent UTIs due to prostate. Polypharmacy is a very big common in these elderly people, and so electrolyte imbalance is another issue. So for these reasons, you can use. There is nothing to contraindicate, but one needs to have the antenna higher up, and therefore one needs to be careful. I rushed through it because we have 7 minutes to go, but it was an important area as to when not to use SGLT2 or when to use it carefully. Now, and I think we covered this. Why is there inertia to the use of it? And Manoj actually brought it out that one of the main reasons was cost, which has been reduced, and now maybe the percentage of people using SGLT2 will increase. So the comfort zone of all the other drugs is probably, it's an inertia, and that's, I think, sums it up why people are not shifting from one to the other. And there are many such reasons why it is not common, but if you use the pros and cons, you will know that you should favor SGLT2. So in the last 6 minutes, we take up the symptomatic issues. Munna Bhai was distraught after 15 years. He complains of tiredness, fatigue, shortness of breath. Creatinine is 6. He has poor appetite, irregular bowels, and some features of cystopathy, etc. Leg pains. What next? One by one, any of the panelists can pick up issues and talk of. Nephropathy. Bhavesh, what preparation? So what preparation would you make if he had come to you with symptoms like this, or would you straight send him for? Would you want to try diuretics and make a fistula, or you said the bus, he has lost the bus?
But if he's a diabetic and he has decent size, he has good veins, there is no absolute indications yet. We could make a fistula.
Right.
Try symptomatic till the fistula matures, but be very, very clear that we want to start dialysis and not give the medicines as an alternative to dialysis.
Correct. And as a primary care physicians, would you advise them something about vaccinations, saving the veins, and the red flags and things like that? The primary care physician is interested in knowing. Abhi a patient pehle uske paas aaya, did not reach Rishi Deshpande so quickly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So vaccination strategy.
As soon as the patient has crossed the stage 4, it is time for the patient to get prepared mentally for dialysis, and that includes getting an access ready. So keep the non-dominant hand spared and do not prick it repeatedly, so that the veins are in decent condition to have a fistula done. Get the vaccinations, at least the important ones, the hepatitis B and the pneumococcal vaccines, and the annual flu shot, because these are people who actually benefit from it.
Okay, so Manoj wanted the ladies to answer a few more questions. What about gastropathy? One of them, how do you handle the patient with gastropathy symptoms? Purvi or Ami, anybody?
Sure, sir. So for gastropathy, sir, first of all, it's important to actually understand that it is gastropathy, because many a times they are just symptoms and the drugs that we typically use for gastropathy or just gastric symptoms, sometimes they enhance the problem more than anything else.
Okay.
So that's one thing. And then if it's severe, then I think procedures like POEM and stuff are done so that that is also taken care of.
Okay.
But yes, addressing that would be important.
Right. The patient does not sleep, has leg pains, restless leg syndrome, and this is very common much earlier than he has developed right now. So, Ami, you want to handle this guy's sleeplessness at night? What do you normally do? What issues come up?
Yeah, so yes, sir, we have patients with this neuropathy symptoms, and also we counseling is very important in these patients because these symptoms take a lot of time to settle down. So counseling really helps. Then we give them symptomatic treatment which would help them, and again, the insulin which is on would also help them. So counseling, symptomatic treatment, and reassurances, I think, which would take care of these things also, sir.
Right. Apart from gabapentin, do you all use any other drug, any of the three diabetologists?
Sir, I use duloxetine and
Okay.
pregabalin also. So I
Okay.
mean, yeah.
So having used it, this patient was very happy continuing it, but the moment his creatinine reached 6, he landed up with a lot of symptoms. Bhavesh and Rushi, what kind of symptoms do you see in patients who are on significant dose of gabapentin for their neuropathy?
So typically they will have, long drowsiness and, loss of thought process, and they remain confused. And the effect of medication can last for a longer period of time compared to non-CKD patients. Also, there is some degree of retention, salt and water retention tendency with gabapentin, though it's not so pronounced, but it would be a contributor. So we'll need to look at all these things and, look at the benefit versus the side effect profile, and maybe counsel and reduce the dose if possible, or make it infrequent, or reduce the half a pill or something. And if possible, also you try and correct acidosis, hyperphosphatemia, hyperparathyroidism, vitamin D deficiency. These are also significant contributors to the neuropathic symptoms.
Okay.
So many a times you correct the acidosis more effectively, especially when the creatinine is 6 and GFR is towards 10 or 15. Correction of acidosis becomes very, very critical to prevent sudden sickness in such patients. And you look for their hyperparathyroidism and check that out and correct it with correct the deficiency of vitamin D, phosphate binders. All those things are going to help the patient.
I think we are nearing the end of the discussion. So
Sir, one question,
yes,
Manoj here.
yes, yes.
Pregabalin and chance of hyponatremia, especially in the elderly. That's
Yes,
something
right,
to
yeah.
keep in mind.
Hyponatremia,
Yeah.
water retention, constipation, neurological symptoms. It's a drug which is very good, and at the same time has its own set of problems. So I think I would like to end by changing the entire paradigm of which Manoj actually brought it out much in the beginning. And for the reasons as mentioned here, for a diabetic, CKD is a double whammy. The onset of kidney disease heralds the onset of CVD, leading to what is described as a life's paradox, which states that in diabetic CKD, only the lucky ones reach dialysis. All others perish because of CVD. And CVD and CKD protection should always go hand in hand with diabetes control. And hence, it's the importance of changing the paradigm in diabetes control from glucose-centric approach to CV protection, as has been brought out by almost every panelist. So to conclude, we have now KDIGO guidelines which are telling us on how to manage diabetes and CKD. They are available, but I don't want to go through them. And I think I will close by asking the chairpersons to give their comments on this entire panel discussion. A few minutes to them. Dr. Deepak. Yeah.
So the very importance of weight control, BP control, and sugar control and fat control from day one till the end must be emphasized along with the dietitian. And under no circumstances capsule can take over lifestyle changes. That should be remembered and practiced, and that is a humble request. And especially on the protein adequate diet, because there is a lot of controversy. So the protein adequate diet throughout is a very important thing. And early dialysis, not late dialysis. Early insulin, early dialysis should be the mantra, should be told to the patient, and that's my message.
Thank you so much. So I think we had a wonderful session and we brought out most of the points. So may I ask Keyur to wind up without
Umesh bhai,
giving,
transplant, we have to make a comment about the transplant.
we will-
Just one
Okay,
quick
Keyur
comment.
might-
I mean,
Keyur might
Keyur,
say
let
that the
Keyur comment.
organizing. Yeah.
let
Please,
Keyur
please.
comment.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
No,
no,
we
you
can go
can,
ahead
you
with
can- you
transplant.
can go
Yes,
ahead.
so that's
Yeah,
an
yeah.
extremely
So-
important topic.
Yes.
So ideally, Munna bhai has been following with us for several years, and it's high time that rather than preparing him for dialysis, we should prepare him for transplant. And the counseling of which should begin right in the beginning of when the disease is progressive, and eventually we should have potential donor worked up and ready, and probably consider a preemptive transplant in such individuals, because from the time a patient is in a dialysis stage, the duration of life and the quality of life both will improve a lot by transplanting these individuals as compared to putting them on dialysis. Thank you.
In fact, taking a cue from that, we are going to have the next session on CKD. However, a big hand to the panel. I mean, in extreme circumstances, I know at least 3 of the panelists who are in difficult circumstances, but have shown that, the show must go on. So, I mean, a big hand to the entire panel, and I definitely owe them a special lunch. And keeping up to the word, Dr. Chawla, I will fulfill my promise.
Pretty soon, Keyur. Thank you so much for having us here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, as I have always maintained, panelist job is really more difficult. Moderator को तो कुछ भी वो आता है कि नहीं आता है subject, he has to only ask questions. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Keyur.
Bye.